Today I'm speaking with Adam Plouff, creator of some of the most widely used tools for motion designers, including Overlord, Rubber Hose, Time Lord, Anubis, and many more. Adam's work actually has a special place in my heart because it's actually one of the first plugins I ever installed for After Effects was one of the ones that he first developed, which was Butt Capper. It lets you quickly round the ends of paths in After Effects. We spoke a lot about his journey into being a developer for this niche area of motion tools, kind of his journey of releasing imposter syndrome, I guess, and his craft and the way that he's learned over the years. The kind of more broad relationship of code and motion and being a coder and being a motion designer. We talked about creativity, flow, obsession and passion, and other stuff like developing for Adobe, the kind of the real technical side of that, his work in motion pipelines for Google, and of course, much, much more. Adam is a real OG in this space, but also just such a lovely, legit guy. I always love meeting your heroes, and they turn out to be really sort of grounded and self-effacing people. So as always, if you appreciate the show, share it with a friend or leave a rating wherever you're listening right now. And I hope you enjoy this interview with Adam Plouff. So Adam, I want to talk to you today about lots of things, right? Your craft, your creativity, career, tools, but I wanted to start with kind of like a high level question about your journey. It strikes me that maybe your career and work has been one that's much more sort of evolved over time, like organically, rather than you deciding, I'm going to go and do this. Maybe you did at one time. I'm interested, like, is that true? Have you ever decided to have like clear goals or intentions about your mission at any point, or has it always just been a kind of natural evolution of your passions and interests?
Yeah, I think that the path for me and career and whatever this whole thing is called, experiment, has just been falling and catching myself right at the last minute and saying, oh, this is a new place that I am. Let's see what this is about. And I haven't planned any of this. I fell into everything and then fell into something else after that, and then fell into something else after that. And I'm not sure where I'm going to fall next. I think I'm trying my best to be flexible about it and see where life and work and curiosity takes me with all of this, because it's all just been what am I curious about now, and where's this taking me, and how can we actually make this a sustainable process?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And at a high level, how would you kind of like sum up your career so far? Like, you started out as a designer or a motion designer primarily, and then naturally evolved into creating things to make your work more efficient. And now that's what you primarily do. Is that if not a very contracted kind of description, is that sum it up, or am I missing anything there?
No, yeah, you nailed it. That the whole process was, it started with music and being in a band, and then realizing that wasn't a very viable option with the group of people I was with. And so I looked for other things, and the closest thing to me was a video production school. And mostly I learned about video editing and how to cut things together, but it was kind of framed through broadcast and news, which I was not interested in at all. But I'd spent some time in Photoshop doing shirt design and things like that. So I thought it would be easy to I'll just go with that. Maybe that'll lead to something. Just kind of being open to it, what the whole process would be. And then I fell in love with After Effects in school. And I guess this was probably around the After Effects 6.5 mid 2000s time. And I think that everybody along the way with After Effects, I think sooner or later you hit this point where once you learn, oh, I can keyframe this, I can put this here, I can create this thing, you kind of get this almost godlike feeling of I can make anything. And for me, it was kind of, I saw After Effects as this really open-ended playground where I didn't know how to do it, but I saw that you could write expressions, and I was like, that's kind of interesting. I think code is cool, but I don't know how to do it, but I think that's neat. And plugins and scripts were not on my radar at all, but I thought that I don't see a dead end in this. I don't see an end point in this. So let's try this. Let's go with it and see what happens. So it was, my experience was mostly in video, just video production in general. And then I ended up at a post house and just started cutting promos for TV back when you used to have commercials on TV that told you when to watch stuff before you streamed everything. So I'm dating myself a little bit. But that led to, the clients would ask, could you do you know anybody that can put together like an end card? We just need some graphics on it. I was like, I do that. Like, no, but we need to take it to like one of those fancy like flame or smoke machines. Like, no, I got After Effects over here. I can do that. You do that too? So, okay. So that just became, that led to me being really busy with just the umbrella video production thing here in Atlanta. And then I got really busy and I started needing to find ways to streamline just my own work, not for anybody else. I was doing a lot of work for Latin American networks. So we had a lot of versioning to do and there was no linking to spreadsheets or anything. And I just kept messing things up because I don't speak Spanish and Portuguese. So I learned enough to get by, but I needed to get the end card, the dates and the times right for all of these different versions, and I had to deliver them and I had to organize them. And it was a challenge because I needed to find ways to just help myself. And I think all of the best tools and systems are usually just scratching your own itch. And that's what I ended up having to do, is just scratch my own itch about how to deliver on time and at a high enough quality that I wasn't going to get called in over the weekend. And then it turned into, I actually like doing this more than I like doing the video production. So clients started actually paying me for, hey, we have this studio and they made this toolkit for us, but it's kind of, we need it to be more so that we could just hand it to video editors and they can version things. And this was before After Effects and Adobe had Mogerts. And so I was just responsible for building out toolkits that video editors could plop in new titles and change out a few things. And this was early this was in 2010 or so, before a lot of the bridge between video in Premiere and it was Final Cut at the time. Before all of that was bridged between a lot of the stuff that Adobe was doing internally. And it just seemed like a natural progression to move, I have to solve this problem for myself and now I'm solving it for other people. And I kind of like solving problems for other people. And that sort of became my role in a lot of production is, we're going to hire Adam to just be there to connect all of these things that we don't really know how it's going to be connected. Somehow it has to connect. Like, we have a deadline, but he's the guy that can kind of, he'll put together something, he'll figure it out. And that sort of just led me into needing to learn just enough code to create tools that would help me be the guy that would help finish a project and get it over the finish line. And I started doing less and less actual design stuff, which was kind of great because I wasn't really strong at that work anyway. There was just a lot more reliable folks in the pipeline to be able to do that. So it just, one thing led to another, which led to another. And now I don't really set too many keyframes anymore. Whenever I actually do get called on to do something for a project, it's kind of refreshing. I have to think, wait a minute, I know how to do that. I still know how to do this. It's like speaking a language that you haven't spoken in years, but it still kind of comes back to you really quickly. And you realize, oh yeah, I do. I remember I did do this for a while. So that's kind of where I am now, is just, I'm remembering a lot of the stuff that I've long forgotten, but it's kind of fun. It kind of is a fun surprise whenever I get to work on a production.
Yeah. You mentioned some stuff there about like the early automation and tool creation that you did in your career. Like, you mentioned this sort of the reversioning stuff. That wasn't like data-driven stuff. It was more like Essential Graphics, Moga type stuff, or pre that. Or were you truly like linking up a spreadsheet to After Effects?
I mean, early on, before any of the real spreadsheet linking was happening, there was, I remember there was a guy at a studio down the block from where I was. It was a place called Primal Screen. There was a guy named Dale over there, and he did kind of the Cody stuff for their whole studio. And he had put an article online about how to link a spreadsheet. And this was this had to have been in 07 or 08. And this was way before any of that. And he had come up with a way to actually, it was like scraping CSV data out of, you had to take your Excel files and like save them to CSV so that you could have a script that would go and manually read all of those values. And then it would insert, it was, I didn't understand scripting at the time, so I didn't know how it worked, but it would pop it in. And then I ended up getting a job to work at that shop Primal Screen. And then I remember I didn't know who had written that article. And I walked in and there was a code guy, and it was like, I was trying to be cool because I was 22 and thought it would be like, oh yeah, I've seen this thing online. Have you seen this? It's this cool thing. And this guy, he wrote this script to like automate spreadsheets. And the guy looked at me and he's like, is it this one? Because I wrote that. And I felt super embarrassed. And I realized at that point that this industry, the motion design industry, is a lot smaller than I really kind of expected it to be. And when you get further down into the niche of we are building automation for some of this stuff, it's even smaller. Like especially at the time, there was only a handful of people that were doing a lot of that stuff. And it was if you talk to the old guys who were in the industry back when the big expensive machines and the smokes and the flames, like, they weren't trying to be fast. They were trying to make their hourly rate, their day rate. And so they didn't mind just copy and paste. And then as the industry kind of sped up and budgets shrank and everybody needed to become more efficient to get the work done, it became apparent that that workflow was not sustainable. There was not going to be a way forward for that. And automation, for better or worse, kind of became a necessity. It became something that, like, we need to spend the money on the creative. And then we need somebody who could be maybe lower paid, or a computer could just take care of all this stuff. And having delivered, we used to deliver on tape. We used to have to deliver on digibeta tapes, and then eventually it became HD cam. And so you had to physically lay the video onto tape, and then a courier had to take that across town to get it to the network. So there was no room for, oh, I messed up an end card. Hold on, let me re-upload it. You had to make sure that it was on tape that would match the slate so that somebody could ingest it into the system. So there was just no room for messing up like that. Not that there's much room anymore, but still, like, the expectations are even higher now for what you can and can't deliver. But then there just wasn't any bandwidth for that. If you mess something up, then you would have to come in over the weekend and fix it. And there was no other way around it. But yeah, the early days, I think it was clear that we needed a way forward to streamline a lot of this stuff, to give artists the room to actually make the art instead of spending all of their time creating versions and creating end cards that nobody really wants to do. That stuff is not fun.
Ari on from Data Clay, Templater. He was the last guest, and we did a real deep dive into all of that, and it's fascinating, like, new area for me. So just staying with the early days of your like exploration into this area, a lot of people knew you back then, or you kind of grew big from Rubber Hose. Is that right? But am I right that wasn't the first tool that you made? Was it Butt Capper or
they both else? Rubber Hose and Butt Capper were released at the same time, and it was kind of a it was a little bit intentional. Butt Capper was the first thing that I was working on, that I wanted a way to.
I think that's what I wanted to ask. That's the question. Is like, because in my, like, I have such a fond, like, Butt Capper has such a fond place in my heart, because, like, when I was first starting out with After Effects, that was like the first thing I wanted to do. And I was like hanging out with Kyle, and he was like, oh, you should just use this. And I was like, oh wow, there's a tool that does it. And that was my, like, early moment. It's like, oh, okay, tools help you do these things rather than toggling down or whatever. And, like, it was nice to hear that was one of the first things. So I'm just interested, like, from a kind of coding perspective, was that the first sort of technical thing that you did? Was it hard? How long did it take you? I'd be really interested to dive into that a bit.
Yeah, I guess the first thing I did, this was in the Dribble days. So this was early, I guess it was probably 2014, 2015. Motion, Twitter, and Dribble were kind of, Motionographer were the main outlets. So you just dreamed of, you would put stuff on these places and hope for a Vimeo staff pick, and just the old markers of success in a very small industry, that I would just put things on Dribble and cross post them on Twitter when it was a much more positive place about, here's a thing that I'm working on. What do you think? And people would say, oh, that's really interesting. Can I try that? And like, I don't know if you can. It's just a weird expression I wrote. So the first thing I wrote was I was trying to make lines to just draw lines between points, which that sounds like a really basic thing, and it kind of is now, but at the time there really wasn't a good way to do that. There was maybe the beam effect. I think there's you could set 2 points, and then you could maybe link the 2 points and then create multiples. But I really wanted to see if I could make a point with a vector line. I didn't know if that was even possible, because why would you know if it's possible at the time? So that was where I was trying to go. And I was trying to do it was really boring, but I really wanted to make a graph line, which is super easy to do now. But at the time there was no real good way to do it. So I wanted to see if I could make a graph line, because that seemed like an explainery type thing that you'd have to do a lot, like a graph animating up. And so I tried doing that. And then that turned into a motion or a smear line sort of effect, that as something would move through the screen, it would kind of measure where those points are, and then it would sort of draw a simple, really, really bad line between that. And then once I had kind of worked out how to draw lines from points to points, it sort of became a natural, like, oh, well, I want them to be curved. Can we make the lines curve based on some of that? So I was doing a rough approximation of what the curve would kind of look like, and it looked really bad. But that sort of turned into, I got another job where I needed to create, 20 some different characters, and they all needed to look kind of different. It was just a corporate explainer video thing, but it needed just enough customization that at the time, I think it was probably Duick was all that was really available. Maybe Greg Gunn's Puppet Tools, that might have been it. But to have something that could be easily changed. So I spent a day or two modifying my curve code, because all the curve code would do was draw a line between 2 points, and then you would sort of just say, is it a curve like this, or is it a curve like that? And that's really all that it did. But it was enough to take that code and turn it into, okay, here's a start point, here's an end point, just draw a curve between that. And then as those 2 points come together, do more bending. And that was kind of all it really did. So the character animation is garbage on that project, but it turned into a whole project where I showed people, like, how did you do all these things? And I put a little behind the scenes of like, oh yeah, and I made little hands because there's this little gesture thing. This had to have been 2014, 2015. And it's like the thumb is moving around on the screen, and no, people hadn't really done a lot of that at the time. And it caused enough of a buzz on the social medias at the time that I thought, oh, maybe this could be a thing. I've been looking for a thing. I've always wanted a thing. I don't really want to teach people. I'm not a very good teacher, but I kind of want to have a thing that I can put on the internet, and maybe people will want to buy it, and maybe it'll help people do their work faster, because that was kind of my job at the time, was the fixer of projects that connected between our artists and the finished product. So it scratched that itch, but at a larger scale. Maybe at a larger scale. Maybe it was just going to help my friends on social media, and that would have been cool. That would have been fine enough too, my internet friends. And so I just started posting videos on there of like, hey, here's this thing I'm working on. It's kind of cool. And more people were really excited about it. But all it was an expression. It was just at most a preset that you could apply to your project. And it was still very, very manual. So I reached out to Lloyd at AE Scripts and said, hey, is this a thing? I've never seen anything like this. Do what do you think of this? And he was like, oh my gosh, we would totally sell this. Can you give it to me as a script? And I was like, I don't know what scripting is. This is a preset. He's like, I can't sell a preset. I can sell a script. So go home, figure out how to make it into a script, and then we'll talk. And so I now, like, up until this point, it was very clear goals of like, I need to learn how to make a line, and then I need to make a line with a curve on it, and then I need to make it into a reusable expression with maybe some like effect sliders that you can adjust some of that. And then now I had another clear goal of, oh, you need to learn how to make a script that will apply this effect preset thing, and then maybe you can actually sell it and make some money outside of work. And so I got to Googling about how to make a script, and there was not a lot of information at the time. And so I just did my best. It was really bad, but it became a script. And then I showed it to some people, like, well, we need a panel. It's like, okay, there's a difference between making a script and making a panel. Okay, I guess I got to learn how to do that. So I learned enough of how to make a panel that you could dock in your workspace in After Effects, and it was good enough. And I showed it to some more people, and they said, this is really solid. I think this is going to be really interesting, because I mean, it goes back in time, but there wasn't a lot of rigging. Now there's a lot of rigging tools, but at the time there weren't any rigging tools available. So it was kind of refreshing to a lot of people. So we decided to go ahead. I've been freelancing for my whole adult life, which at that point was only about 7 years. Feels like a very small amount of time now, but I'd been freelancing, and the doing it yourself that was kind of part of my ethos about how you do things. So I decided I'm going to try to sell this on my own. I kind of like the idea of setting up a store. I kind of like the idea of marketing these things. I've spent all of my career marketing things for other people. Now I have a product that I could actually market myself. This would be kind of a fun experiment to see if I learned anything from doing this for clients, or if I need the client to actually push me to make some interesting work. So it really just became an experiment. So I decided to not sell it on a marketplace, but sell it just through my own website. And while I was building this bendy line tool, I was doing a lot of strokes, and I got really frustrated with how After Effects would always default to a certain stroke type, and it was never the stroke type that I wanted. It was always, when I wanted a round cap, it was always a butt cap, and when it was always a butt cap, I wanted a round cap. So it never did what I wanted it to do. So I thought, well, shoot, I wish I had a button that I could click to switch between those types, and I would just dock it. And then I realized, oh, hey, I just learned how to make a script panel. Maybe I could just do that too. And so I made it, and that probably took a day to throw that together. It was really quick. It was just an afterthought, and I didn't know what to do with it. I was just going to just put it online for free. And somebody recommended, like, hey, that should be how you get people that should be your funnel. It's like, what's a funnel? Because I really didn't know. I had never been on that side of the marketing of like how you. I was on the production of marketing materials, but I wasn't on the strategic marketing side of things. So the idea that you would funnel people in with something that is free and then share value, and then eventually, hopefully, they turn into a customer, that just was not on my radar at all. I was not. I'm glad I had people around me that steered me in the right direction, because that became something that people were happy to share and laugh at the name. And then it led them to liking Rubber Hose, and then working through that and sharing that and getting it out in front of people, that turned into getting a call from Google. And that was kind of what kickstarted me not being exactly a motion designer anymore, but more of a software developer for motion to support motion designers, which I didn't really ever expect that to happen.
Yeah, and I definitely want to dive into the Google stuff. So how long ago? I mean, you can answer in a sec, but like, I'm interested in how long ago that was and what the time span is between then and now. And just over that time, I'm interested in your reflections on like your learning journey, like from those early steps where there were like not many resources out there, and how your kind of craft has grown, and also maybe like the resources out there that have grown. Like there's a lot of stuff on scripting and loads on expressions, School of Motion course on expressions. Um, like, how has it grown, and how would you kind of describe your skill set today?
Yeah, wow, that's this is the year of our Lord 2025. So we are coming up on, I guess, about 10 years of me trying to, like, really trying to figure out how to do code stuff, starting from next to nothing. I had tried to learn processing, which I guess is called P5 JS now, but it was Java at the time, and was not, it was not a fun first language to try to learn. I didn't understand it at all, but I had tried it multiple times, and there was really only a handful of After Effects scripting resources out there. I mean, from expressions, there was only, I guess, the Dan Eberts, that was the go-to of anything. That was all there really was.
When I
And
think of
pretty
that
much
website, I
everybody.
think of like the early website, the early web. Like it really like
Yeah.
reminds me of that
Oh man,
in so many
I don't
ways.
think he's changed it since then, which makes me so happy because
It's a
it's such a
beautiful
time
feeling.
capsule. Yeah.
Going there.
Same thing with like Creative Cow. Like Creative Cow has not changed their design at all
They still
since
do their
the
pop-ups though.
2000s. Oh yeah, still mountains of pop-ups, but you got to make your money somehow.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it was at the time I was just like every other motion designer where I would go look at Dan Ebert's site, copy, paste, didn't work, look at it and try to just decipher this. Okay, this is doing this is doing this other thing. Okay, well maybe if I were to replace that number with if I pick whip that over here. So it kind of, I think if it weren't for After Effects, I probably wouldn't have learned how to do code because it has enough of a visual feedback. I was drawn to processing and P5 when because I liked the visual aspect of it. I liked that you could write ellipse, parentheses, and the dimensions of it, and you could see it on screen. But there was still just enough of a disconnect between the code and what was actually being drawn that I couldn't click with it. With After Effects, though, it I mean, I don't think it's the best way to learn how to code, but for me, like my brain, I needed very visual feedback of, oh, I have a slider, I have a rectangle, and this slider is being controlled by this rectangle. It was clear enough, the steps and the order of operations, like, oh, this slider has a value, and this value is being multiplied by this number, and this number is being applied to the X position. Okay, I'm seeing how the numbers flow from here to here to here to here. And then you can add complexity to that and add variety to it. And it was enough of a step to step that I was able to take some of these coding concepts that I had kind of learned abstractly and apply them to visuals. And still, I couldn't figure out, like, when am I ever going to use a conditional statement? When am I going to use an if else inside of After Effects? And it took me a while to actually run into a problem where you would need something like that. But it's just enough to see the flow of data and the flow of numbers and how math works to make things move on that. But yeah, it was a challenge to learn that stuff. And I think that to learn it now, it's so much easier, that the resources that are out there to find it, and you can learn how to do that stuff. For me, I don't know. It's as a 40-year-old man, I struggle with the things were hard in my day and therefore they were better. Like, I'm trying not to do that, but they were more difficult it was more difficult to find that stuff. And I speak from a point of privilege of like being able to jump on the internet and just Google how to do something like that. I mean, for generations prior, like that wasn't a thing. But for me, it was more difficult to find some of this stuff because you couldn't just go and read read a blog about how to build a script. You couldn't just jump on Medium and find a whole walkthrough on how to build an extension. And so a lot of that stuff it was really, really difficult. But that level of difficulty was sort of a forcing, it was sort of like a bottleneck to say, no, you can't do that, or I don't know how to find out how to do that, but we can do this. So let's try that. And it kind of encouraged a little bit of creativity in what could and could not be built. So that was where, like, I really, for years, I only knew exactly as much code as I needed to build the things that were in my brain. And I felt bad about it for a while. I felt like I was not a real coder until I got to be working next to folks who actually went to school for computer science. And I realized that they had their code environment on one screen and they had Stack Overflow on the other one. And it clicked with me that, oh, real coders are the people who know how to find the information that they need. It's not that they have everything inside their brain, because you can't keep all of this esoteric symbols and connections inside your brain at all times. You have to know how to find the things that you are going to use to connect with your idea. And that was a big, I remember having a visceral feeling in my body that I'm not a fake. I'm actually okay. I'm actually doing the right thing in this. And that's kind of cool. And so from that point on, I stopped. I mean, it wasn't like imposter syndrome was gone, but I stopped beating myself up about not knowing how everything works. I started just embracing I'm not sure. Let me think about that. And that allowed me the space to actually go in and learn some of this stuff. And still, I still only barely know exactly what I need to make the stuff that I want to. But the stuff that I want to is sort of gone in all these different directions that I only know. I don't know FFmpeg. It's a cryptic set of commands to just render a QuickTime. But because it was so frustrating to, like, I don't care about bit rates and stuff, but I want something that I can just click and just make me a nice tidy MP4. So I got really into FFmpeg and MP4 compression and trying to figure out how enough of that stuff works. And it's still a mess to me, but I learned enough of it that I was able to build a product out of it. And then that knowledge was able to kind of like roll back into this other thing. So it's like, I don't know, I guess like a multi-pointed star of like, I know a very slim bit of knowledge in this direction, and I know a very slim piece of knowledge in this direction, but for some reason there's like this weird overlap where like the knowledge from this and the knowledge from this actually kind of fills in this knowledge in between that I didn't know about how this worked, but now it's starting to click. And now I'm able to more reliably solve problems that I couldn't before, because I had a very, very narrow set of skills for how to actually solve these code problems.
Yeah. Resonating so much with what you're saying there, not necessarily as a developer, but just from the perspective of the journey and the art of learning, like the kind of the just leaning into imperfectionism and or just in time learning really is, if I was to sum up what you said, it's like it's all about just in time learning. And also like the visual feedback of it. Like we often, when you think of like new coding bootcamp type stuff or like kids learning to code, you think of these sort of like visual environment on the right with like dinosaur moving 2 blocks or whatever. And I feel like although I haven't gone down the route of After Effects development loads, like just my small forays into it, particularly in the early days with expressions as well, I'd already tried doing coding boot camps and stuff like that, and it was all like web based, and I was like, I don't want to make a website. I can make a website with Webflow, but I was really pushing myself through the course in a kind of like delusional way. I was never going to make it through because there wasn't a real reason at the core. But as soon as I was like getting that visual feedback and had this reason, I was like, I want to do motion. I want to like compute this motion or like create this motion, or I don't know how. There was a real reason to do it. And I suddenly like JavaScript in a very small way kind of like came through, and I was like, okay, And I think it's so easy for us to fool ourselves and say that we're motivated to ourselves when we're not, like, about certain things. And then a thing comes along that we're like deeply aligned to because we actually want to do it. And then you witness your ability to learn and iterate come online. I find that really interesting. And what you said about the Stack Overflow thing and seeing the pros also doing the same thing. Yeah, I think a lot of people have that journey. So
yeah, I completely agree with that. That when you can't see, when you're learning in the abstract, like making a dinosaur move across screen with blocks that you stack together, like that's so abstracted from what you might actually want to do. Like maybe you're a kid and you're like, I want to make Fortnite or whatever kids do these days. Like you have a goal in mind of what is really appealing to you, but making a dinosaur move with stacked blocks of code components just is so abstracted from that it's really hard to really move through that. And that was the same thing for me. Like when I was just making really goofy looking screensaver type stuff inside of Java, like it was so different from what I actually wanted to do that there was no real motivation to keep going. But once I'm making code to make video. I make video in my day job, so I can actually see the this to this to this. I can see the progression of how I would go from being I don't know anything about code, I'm pasting stuff from Dan Ebert's website, to, oh, I'm solving problems in a production pipeline with code. Like that is much more clear, that you can imagine, oh, if I learn these things, then I can definitely do this other thing. And then if I learn that other thing, then I can build on that and I can actually build this other thing. Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think that is it's different. Like I think the coding boot camps and the early visual things are very helpful, but for me personally, that was not the most effective way. It was really just applying one little thing, applying a really tiny thing to a job that I was working on inside of After Effects. And then the next one, oh, well, I did that little code snippet the other day, but I think I understand it a little bit better. I'm going to try to clean it up. I'm going to see if I can use it and add a little checkbox over here. So when I check the checkbox in this one comp, it's going to create 2 boxes over here. Or I'm going to check this checkbox and it's going to turn on 5 layers of drop shadow to create a really nice soft thing. And it's not amazing. I could have just done it manually, but I did. I went through the process of figuring out how to set up a conditional statement for one little control. And that right there is, I think, how I made the progression anyway. I don't know if that's how everybody does it or if it's even the right way to do it, but that's definitely how I did it.
Yeah. Another little reflection I had, I don't know if this resonates, is just there's a kind of background or behind, just like similarity between the way that a motion designer works and the way that a developer works, in that you're trying to solve a problem and there's something quite logical and maybe computational about doing motion design. Like you have to make things, especially if you're working with procedural stuff, but like you're trying to make something do something and it's a technique you've never used before and you have to sort of like go out there on the internet and find it. But it sort of feels like sometimes with motion design, it's like harder to find those things. Whereas with code, you can be like, you can articulate the problem a lot better sometimes. Whereas with motion, you're like, I want to make this wiggle in a certain way. Like it's hard to like index on that and find it. I think that motion designers have very special brains. I think that whatever it is that goes wrong inside of humans that causes them to go down the path of motion design, it creates the conditions for you to be willing to sit in a dark room. Excuse me. It creates the conditions to sit in a dark room and push keyframes around for hours and hours, which when I describe what I do or did to anybody, they're like, I'm sorry, what is your next step? What do you do after this? I'm like, no, this is my step. Are you seeing someone for this problem, or like?
Yeah, they would treat it as if something was wrong inside of me, that I enjoyed doing this. So I think that there's something special about motion designer brains, that they are more willing to to brute force their way through a problem and, oh, I don't know how to make this work. Well, I'm just going to go frame by frame and I'm going to fix it. Or we have a little bit of extra artifact on this. Well, let's just go through and paint it out. Or, I mean, roto has been taken care of by AI, but like back in the day when you're like, oh, well, we have to roto all of this out. Just that brute forcing of, well, we'll fix it. Not like, oh, we'll build a system for it. Like, no, we're going to have somebody go through and fix this problem. And I think that, I don't know, maybe it's kind of like how like Marines or special forces or something, like they get some kind of a high out of being in the awful conditions. I don't know. There's something weird about motion designers, people that are drawn to motion design and are able to find kind of a career in it, that they are sort of drawn to that punishment of that being okay with, like, of course they don't want to work long hours, but it's sort of like, well, gotta work the long hours. And I don't know. So on the one side of it, I think there's a connection between that level of grit and that level of willingness to do the hard thing that connects with development. But on the other side, I also, when I talk with motion designers about some of these things, they're like, yeah, it took like 5 hours, but I got it done. Because all that matters is the shot. That's really all that matters at the end of the day, is how it renders. And then you ask them, like, well, what happens if a client comes back and says they want to change this? Like, well, it's going to be another long night. And like, but you could have just linked this one thing to this other thing. Like, no, I didn't know that. Like, well, you could have just Googled how to do that. Like, yeah, but it was so much faster to just go ahead and brute force it. And so there's a weird disconnect, like between the systematic, like, oh, I'm going to spend, I don't know, there's a, I guess, nerd adage, like, why spend 5 minutes doing something when you can spend 4 hours failing to automate something? And yeah. I think that there is like, on the one side, like, motion designers can just get the job done. Like, there is that special part of their brain that allows them to just like, nope, we're just going to hammer out this shot. Like, that is a novelty inside of like tech, because tech wants to deliberate and cover every stakeholder and make sure that everybody knows, everybody's like, the product is going to be right. Like, motion designers just come in like, nope, come on, we got half a day, let's knock this thing out. And so that is able to like push a project over a finish line really fast. But then on the other side of it, they can kind of dig their own grave by not systematizing some things. So it's a double-edged sword. Like, sometimes you need that level of systematization. That's probably not a word, but sometimes you need to just brute force it, and sometimes you need to come back to it. And I think that that willingness to be like, I don't know how to make this shot. I've seen something that might sort of work, and I have a theory about if I were to use this software to create this thing, and then I bring the render in, and then I can use the matte from that thing. Just that sort of compositing, putting a shot together. You don't know exactly how it's going to work, but you kind of got a theory that I think this will work. If I do this, if this works right, I think it'll work. And so that sort of, I think I've approached development with that mindset, because I'm one of those weirdos that was drawn to motion design and the punishment that it is, that whatever is wrong in my brain that lets me do that work is also kind of there with coding. And I think that most of the success that I've had in developing stuff has been a willingness to just push a little bit further than anybody else was going to. I mean, one example that I remember coming to mind was that when I was trying to figure out how to create gradients with shape layers, Adobe, for all of the amazing documentation and APIs and scripting ability that they've put into After Effects, which it's pretty great. Like, a lot of people want to punch Adobe for various reasons, but they've given developers a lot of tools to be able to make the stuff that they want to, but there is no ability to create a gradient inside of a shape layer. Like it just doesn't exist because of the data structure that they did. Like you can't, what you would normally be able to do is say, create a fill color, and these are the RGB values in floating point, and you will just take that color and put it in there, and then you can do other things like at this point in time create a color and put a keyframe there, and at this point in time create a color and put a keyframe there. And so there's a lot of flexibility that you have in the scripting to make what you want, but there isn't a way to do gradients. You have, because it's contained within this pop-up menu, there is no way to do that. So I realized in the early days of Overlord that I needed a way to set gradients, because gradients are a big part of vector graphics. Like that, you can't, if you just say, yeah, it does vector graphics, except gradients, that was not going to work. So knowing what I know about how to set colors, I knew that you could create if you had an FFX file, a effect preset file, you could apply a gradient. So I thought, oh, well, I need to figure out how to dynamically create an FFX file so that it could apply that gradient. And then I went in there and then I realized that there's some nerdy checksum value that if you modify one of the characters and the character count doesn't match, it breaks. And I guess I'm sure it's a security thing so that people aren't they're not applying something that's going to destroy their project. So I had to go through and figure out how to generate a boilerplate FFX file with the right exact number of floating point values for each color, and then create a system that would dynamically replace those. And when I told some of the coding people inside of After Effects, yeah, I figured out a way to do it. Like, that was awful. Why did you do that? Like, well, because it needed to get done. It needed to happen. Like, how did you?
But it wasn't awful for you.
No, it wasn't awful for me. It was
like, this is the point that, like, I guess you're making. Sorry to jump in, but
yeah, no, that's
I'm
exactly
super
right.
passionate about this. It's like you mentioned this thing. It's like we're all kind of like we find our way. I'm going to paraphrase what you're saying or condense it, but it's like we somehow, if we're lucky, we all find a way to, or an area where we can be obsessional and where we can fall into this flow state. And looking outside of that like dimension that we're just like in there, it's like it sounds and feels and looks like the way that you describe it, which is like crazy boring and annoying. But when you're in it, you're doing these things and they're just the natural consequence of like you obsessing or crunching into this satisfying flow forward towards something, you know? And I find it so interesting how in one area we can be so in flow with this very, you know, gnarly kind of process. And then we go into another area of our lives and we're just like hopeless victims. And we're like, no, I can't do it. Please go away. You know, like, you know, for example, my wife with like technology is like rubbish, but like, you know, organizational planning or whatever, she's like amazing and I'm rubbish, or, you know, those sorts of things. That's a bit of a simplification, but I think we're all like that. And then hopefully we find more and more of those things. And I've personally like denied it for a long time. Like I've spent a lot of my life, more than I would like, sort of trying to convince myself that this area over here, because it's sort of like valued by culture, or like I've always thought it looked cool when I was a kid, or like the outcome of that looks really great, like, I don't know, being a rock star on stage or something like that. I've been like, oh, that's my thing. But over the last sort of 5 years or something, I've very much been thinking about like driving from the base. It's like what is the thing that's driving me? Like, what's the stuff that I seem to be doing and tinkering and messing around with, like on the side, and then sort of like feeding that more, you know? And it's so easy to like not notice that, you know? Anyway, just some reflections there.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. Like, I don't know, life. What is it? Like, life is miserable, but when you find the type of misery that you're okay with, like you're in your good spot. And like a lot of this stuff, kind of on the outside, looks pretty miserable. Like sitting in a dark room pushing keyframes around is miserable to a lot of people. But it's not miserable to motion designers. Like their brains are just wired for that in whatever way. And I mean, I remember early on in my career, I thought I was I took some classes in like rigging and electrical stuff. And like I was going to be doing some live show production. And I tried doing it. And the waiting around was the most miserable thing for me. I couldn't do it. And
Mm.
I quit midway through the job because I just could not. The feeling that I could be doing something else was drove me insane. That I'm here, I'm making money, but my job is to be ready to wrap cables when I'm done, when the show is done. That that was the most excruciating experience of my life, and I knew that I just was not cut out for live production. That I was made to be. I knew that that was never going to be like someone on a film set or anything glamorous that I thought what I thought was glamorous. Like you said, that the society or the internet or behind the scenes looks at things make a lot of these parts of production look glamorous or cool or what you should be interested in. And for a long time, I thought that I was lacking. I wasn't good enough at design, or like I was pretty good at setting keyframes, but I thought I needed to be better at drawing so that I could do cell animation or whatever else that I beat myself up over of not being as good as I thought I should be. And it really wasn't until I found code as an expression of I have a problem, I want to solve it, and I think I can do it in an elegant way that makes other people's lives more enjoyable. Like that was the click for me, that I realized I don't have to be so obsessed with making visual art or being the best at that. Like that could be a small part of it, but I get to make these things that help other people do their work. And that's really, really cool. Like I felt like an artist for the first time. Like I always wanted to be a visual artist, but I never could quite do it. There was just enough gap in my wiring or my threshold for misery or whatever it was that prevented me from getting to the point where I actually could enjoy making visual art. And but with code, I was perfectly fine with that level of misery that other people would think was awful and you should never do it. But I kind of finally got to the realization that, oh, I shouldn't try, like, yeah, push yourself to do hard things, but also when you find something that you're good at that is kind of a natural thing that doesn't feel miserable, that's actually kind of a good place to be. And if you can get good at that, then you might have a kind of life that you could really enjoy. And that was a weird realization for me, that I didn't have to be beating myself up over not being the best visual artist ever.
Yeah, there's this kind of like thing that has been in the back of my mind for years. I haven't like formalized it in any way, but it's something like there's the kind of like conscious like pilot mind that thinks it knows where we should go and what we should do and what will make us happy. And then there's almost like this, like our natural ability or our like wordless kind of like natural doer that just does stuff, you know, like you could call it the child, I don't know, like the inner ape or something like that. And I feel like in my life anyway, there's always this like interplay between that. There's like, you know, sometimes I'll be like, yeah, I need to do this. This is the right way to go. And then this part will be like, what about this? And I'll be like, oh yeah, that feels better. Okay, yeah, let's do that. You know, like it's a very imperfect way of describing what I feel. But anyway, I wanted to just linger a little bit more on the technology side of stuff of and your journey, because I don't think we got the full answer on that yet. Like, how has the full range of like technologies you've interacted with changed, like from the early days of like expressions or extend script to now where you've got things like Overlord, which are interacting with Figma and, you know, other things, like you're going to be using technology that is and libraries and stuff that you weren't even thinking about in the early days. How has that changed? And maybe you could also, in a long answer, kind of comment on how developing for Adobe products has changed. Like, what I, as a non-developer, I don't know about the extent of what they offer. And yeah, it'd be interesting to get an overview of that. And again, try and bring along non-developers so that they can understand.
Yeah, yeah. Um, my journey with development for, I guess, primarily the Adobe ecosystem began with just expressions of little bits of code that would run inside your project that would change where layers are or change a color a little bit systematically. And then that out of necessity, it became a let's learn how to build a script, which is something that runs once that would build something. So for me, it was let's build a bendy line that's an animator could use to create a little character. So it was still about being something usable. So I was using scripting to create expressions that were a little bit custom to what the user was trying to do, but it was still kind of it was sort of a natural progression. And then that turned into, when I was at Google, I just looked around at we had so many production staff that were waiting around. So this was 2016. So the UI design tool of choice at the time was Sketch. And we had so many people sitting around waiting for the Sketch designs to be done so that they could take the Sketch designs and rebuild them in Illustrator. And then they would take those Illustrator files after a couple days, they would send them to us in the motion design department, and we would animate them. And then if there was a big gap between if the visual designs would change from, some stakeholder decided that instead of the nav bar up here, we need the nav bar down here. So that changes the Sketch files, which then need to get rebuilt as Illustrator files, which then need to get re-ingested into After Effects, which then need to get reanimated. So I remember just having a conversation with my manager, like not knowing if this was possible at all. And it was a clear, like, we have vector shit over here. And After Effects, we animate vector shit. Why are we doing all of this other stuff? Why could we make the vector shit in here be the vector shit in here? And he just kind of gave me probably the freedom I needed. Like I probably wouldn't have done it on my own because I thought I had responsibilities at a job that was paying health insurance and stuff. And he's just like, do you want to try to build that? It's like, I think I do. I think I want to try to build that. So it became just this natural progression of observing this hole in the system of what could and couldn't be done. So I just got to work and I built a really, really rough system of I had to learn some Objective-C, which was not cut out for, but I had to learn just enough of it to take the layer data inside of Sketch and convert it into a format that was text that I could take and paste into an After Effects. It was still a script. It was still really pretty low tech. It was just a script window where you would paste something into it, or maybe it would read the clipboard. I can't remember exactly, but it would you would basically just be generating a text block of data and then pasting the text block of data into After Effects, and it would recreate all of these layers. And honestly, there's a format that is pretty common called JSON, JSON. I didn't know what that was at the time. So I was creating my own string of characters that would sort of represent colors and text and stuff. And then I would bring it in. And I accidentally built my own really bad version of JSON because I just didn't know what it was. And it would break all the time. It was really, really rough. And then I left Google and I explored a lot of things. And I was really interested in extensions at the time, which extensions are kind of like little browser windows that live inside of After Effects or any of the Adobe tools. And that gives you the flexibility to do interesting UI stuff, but you're still having to do the scripting. So I tried a lot of things during it was a year that I was away from Google. And I tried a lot of things and they failed miserably. And one of the ideas that I had was just it would be cool if like we did the Sketch to AE tool that we released open source from Google. What if we did that, but like for Illustrator? So it was just it was a little line item on a list of ideas that I had that if once I get through some of my really cool ideas, that they weren't really cool. They were very big distractions. But once I get through those, then I'll tackle this thing. And I went through that, and I was really sad because all of the ideas that I thought were going to revolutionize the industry, I looked at them and realized that they were a big waste of time. But I learned a lot, and I thought, well, I need a bit of a palate cleanser. I've learned some of this extension stuff, which is, it was JavaScript, HTML, and CSS, which I didn't have much of a background in web development. So it was new for me, moving from scripting to web development. So I learned a little bit of that. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to try took what I learned from moving art from Sketch into After Effects, and I'm going to see if maybe I can do that for Illustrator. And it was a very quick turnaround. I think when I go back and look at from when I started the project, and I use this journal app called Day One. And so I was able to go back and look at like when I started the project to when I actually shipped it. And it was a grand total of 10 weeks, where I just slammed on it. It was nights and weekends. And because once I got in there, I realized, oh my gosh, by using this new technology, this extension technology, I don't need to generate I do need to generate a block of code, but I don't need to paste it. So that the removal of that one little step is where I can just click a button inside of Illustrator and send layer data to After Effects. It felt magical. And I got that that godlike feeling of I can make anything. I got that feeling again. And so I got obsessed with it. And I just, my family thought I was a weirdo because I was just doing this. But it was a 10-week process from I have an idea to going to market with it. But that included like the film, that all the marketing material, all the documentation. And it was a lot simpler tool at the time. So looking back at it, it was really challenging, but I learned a ton about that. But it was still just like vanilla JavaScript to just make it work. And it barely worked, but it did work and it felt magical. And people got real excited about that. And so we created that. And then I went back to Google and one of the projects there was like, oh, well, Figma is this new thing that we're going to do. So you need to figure out how to do that. And the challenge for that was it was outside of the Adobe ecosystem. So the transferring of data was a whole thing. So I had to learn about how like WebSockets work. And I didn't know anything about WebSockets. And it's like a pretty standard web thing, but I wasn't a web developer. So I had to learn how to do that. And then while I was doing that, I started learning about this framework called Vue, VUE, which was, it was helpful for making UI changes and stuff. So I built a couple projects in Vue, and it increased the level of complexity. So I enjoyed like vanilla JavaScript where I could just write stuff and just refresh it and it would just run. And that was exactly where I needed at the time. And then because of people on the internet suggesting like, oh, of course you need to increase the complexity of your tool stack, I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll try this Vue thing. But the challenge with that is that there was so much overhead of like what you needed to actually learn to do a basic thing that I was struggling for a while. But then you also have to have like a build process where you write your code and then you hit build, and then it builds it into the vanilla JavaScript that can run on anything. And so I built a couple projects in that, and we even me and another guy, we built a UI kit for it because I just didn't like how all of the extensions inside of After Effects didn't look like After Effects. It bugged me. They looked like websites, and which of course it's a little web browser. The extension is a web browser. So of course it's going to look like a website because all of the web frameworks, the web UI frameworks are built for web. So they're built for mobile and they're built for multiple things but with a panel that's going to run inside of After Effects, it needed to feel like After Effects to me. So we built it was a UI kit for this. We called it Brutalism. And then that in turn inspired a guy named Justin Taylor, I think, who he was, I think, inspired by that, and he built a whole other system which was so much more robust. It's called Bolt. And so after having built, let's see, we built Time Lord, and then we built Anubis. So Time Lord was for cell animation and kind of a really rough Photoshop to After Effects transfer system that has sort of since been killed because Adobe has switched off of extensions and they're now onto UXP for Photoshop. So that one's kind of sort of been killed unless you want to run an older version. And then we did Anubis, which was a compressor that would run. It's super simple. Like, and some people don't get it. Some people don't understand. Well, like I've got the After Effects render queue can render MP4s, which when we released it, it couldn't do that. So it was filling that gap. But then like, well, why do I need that anymore? I'm like, well, it's just simple. You just if you don't want to, if you want to deal with, if you're fine with dealing and thinking about bit rates and stuff, then yeah, it's not for you. It does a few other really interesting things, but it is so simple that you can just hit a button and then you have a quick time that you can like drop into Discord or Slack and then just send it off to your teammates. It's not your final render. It's not supposed to be your final render. But nobody wants to build a tool that's for rendering really low quality renders. So again, it was just scratching my own itch for that. And then after that,
let's keep the flow, but just a quick interject there. But like, not numbers, but like presumably Anubis has done really well. Like I hear about it a lot. Like a lot of people use it, right?
Yeah, people love it. Like it's a I don't know, sometimes a band has like an album that's not it's not like the massive blow up success, but it's like the hardcore fans' absolute favorite album. I'm drawing a blank for like which one. I don't know. Like Hail to the Thief is my favorite Radiohead album, and it's not everybody's favorite album, but I love that. Like, and maybe it's because it came out at a certain time, but that's my favorite Radiohead album, and it's the right thing for me. And so Anubis is kind of one of those things where the people who love it, and they're constantly suggesting new things, and but it is, I mean, from a business standpoint, it's a much smaller piece of the pie for where income is coming from. And so that was like, after doing that was what led into Rubber Hose 3, which was as Justin Taylor developed Bolt. It's just a framework. It's like I guess it's like a boilerplate for how to make an extension, which there's a lot of really technical nonsense that goes into making an extension. And he just simplified it down to, you run a short little command inside of the terminal and it builds your whole skeleton. And then you can just go in and add what you need and add UI and add scripting, and you can get up and running. And he took care of all of the build process. So if that had existed in the first Overlord days, I would have been so happy, because it would have just taken up so much of the challenge of like all of that. So we started using that and Svelte for JavaScript, and Svelte is a joy to use. I love Svelte. It is just like React or Vue or Angular or any of those, they kind of take the JavaScripty stuff and sort of make it a more pleasing experience. Working with Svelte and Justin's Bolt framework, it changed how much I enjoy working on things, because when you have a set of instructions, like because original Overlord had so many manual processes, I would forget to do one little process, and then something wouldn't build correctly, and then the signature wouldn't apply, and then if I shared it with somebody and like, it doesn't work, it's broken. And I realized that and then that would happen to me, and I was just like, I just don't want to update it. I'm a little scared that I'm going to break it, so I'm just not going to update it. And that stifled creativity, because if I had an idea, it would have to be a really big pain point for somebody who says, this doesn't work anymore, you have to fix it, because then it would take me a whole day to like get up to speed on, oh yeah, I have to remember I have to do this one process and this one process. But the current stack that we're on now is Svelte and TypeScript for doing all of the actual talking to the Adobe apps and stuff. And so we worked on that with Rubberhose 3, and that made it really quick to iterate on. So as we had new ideas, like with the first version we shipped of Rubberhose, didn't have a way of working with puppet pins. And people were kind of upset about that. Like, well, I can't figure out a really good way to do that. And then working with Jake Bartlett, like he came up with a quick way around that. I was like, that's actually a really good idea. Let's implement that. So because our stack now is much more robust and you don't have to, it's less manual. You can just add some code and then run the development script, and it goes ahead and builds everything and turns it into all of the right files that you need. And you don't have to, and it signs it, and you just rate it. So in about, if somebody has an idea or if there's a bug that needs to be fixed, you can just go in and fix it and just go boop, and it'll spit out a new ZXP file, which is the extension file, and you don't have to think about any of the stuff. So that was a big shift for me, is not having to think about all the different steps that needed to go into that. So after,
you're doing for yourself what you're doing for motion designers, really, aren't you?
Exactly. And that's, you know what, it's interesting you bring that up, is that it's kind of like how, like if you're a chef, you spend your whole day cooking. The last thing you want to do is come home and build a 4-course meal. You kind of just want to eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and go to sleep. If it's, whatever you do in your daily life, the last thing you kind of want to do is do it at home. So I've run into that where I spend all of my mental energy thinking about how to streamline and simplify things for other people, that I'm just so willing to accept poor workflows and deal with the pain points of it, instead of just taking a day to really audit, what do I spend my time on? How am I wasting time? Is there a way that I could just build a script for myself that would automate some of that stuff? So the past couple of years has been that's kind of where a lot of my energy has gone towards, is just treating myself like the customer a little bit. Like, you know what? Your work would be better if you made tools for yourself, if you made internal things that would streamline
yourself,
help you not mess up as much. And that's been a huge thing for me, just learning that these build systems and these automations can be really helpful. As I was using the Bolt framework system, me and Justin talk a lot about code things, and he helps me with things that I probably should already know. And I asked him, like, we've got it where it packages up the ZXP file, but I can't just give that to a customer. I have to wrap that in a zip file that's got like the license and the link to the documentation, and like if we do K-bar icons or whatever, it's not enough to just give somebody the raw file. You need to kind of like give them instructions on how to use the raw file. So I need to take a bundle of files and then zip them up into just a zip file. Could we do that? And he was like, I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, we could definitely do that. And it was easy for him. It took him a couple hours, and he updated the script to, and it's helped. I think he open sourced that part too, and it worked out to help a lot of people. That you can really, like, all automation is for, like, it's easy to fall into the trap of automating for automating's sake, but when you can really narrow down the process that you're trying to accomplish and see what is most valuable, when you can remove the chances that you're going to mess it up, when you can get out of your own way, it's really, really, really powerful. And I've only recently started doing that for myself, but it's worth it. It's worth the time.
So I have a kind of question about, this is like kind of cheeky, self-interested, or like, it's for myself, this question, which is about, like, if you were starting out today as a developer for After Effects, if you were trying to create So like this idea I've had in mind for ages is like, just a launcher, like Raycast, or like, if you don't know Raycast and you're listening, Alfred, it's just like quick menu is one thing for After Effects. I've had this desire for ages to like make my own version of that or inspire someone to make their own version, because I think command search for like executing scripts is just so powerful. I use it all the time, and it just blows my mind how few motion designers use it. And like, this is a whole nother topic we can get into about LLMs and stuff, but like I'm not a developer, but I have this whole repo now of like all these different scripts which I just run all the time because of the latest models that have come out. O1 particularly made a big difference. And it's amazing. I remember like posting on your Discord about 3 years ago, or whenever ChatGPT was like new and a thing, and there was a lot of like skepticism about it, but I was like already playing around with it then, and it was a bit janky and like you couldn't do much. But now it's like totally viable. Like, I'm not doing this, but like I think you could sell these scripts on AE Scripts because they're that useful. So anyway, that's a whole nother topic for me. But like, just going to the kind of developer question, if someone was starting out today as a developer to develop something quite straightforward or simple like that, like what is the kind of environment or setup that they would need? Again, I'm obviously asking for myself, but perhaps this will be useful for listeners as well. As like, you mentioned that you've kind of dialed in exactly the way that you work right now, but maybe that's not appropriate for a beginner.
Yeah, I think that I when we started Overlord 2, I realized that we needed to build sort of an app component to it, which I've never built an app before. So I had spent a lot of time in the Adobe world and a little bit in the Figma world, but they're mostly the same. They're mostly kind of mini web tech that that can run inside of a host app. So I stumbled onto a system called Tauri, Tauri, which is kind of like Electron, but it's a lot lighter and a little bit more modern. It allows you to build desktop apps, like an actual app for Mac or an exe for Windows. But the challenge was that it ran in Rust. And Rust is kind of a low level, almost like a C programming language that people love it, but I was coming into it fresh. So the question of like, how would you start something completely new if you didn't know? Like, I just went through that. It was how do I build something with a little bit of knowledge? Like this Tauri framework, you can use web tech. So we used Svelte and JavaScript to build like the front end of it, but we needed to set up a socket server to be able to work with the communication between the different apps, to eventually live completely outside of the Adobe ecosystem, for integrating more apps. So for me, I knew a little bit of web tech. So that was my foundational thing. I was really just use what I know. I know JavaScript, HTML. I like using Svelte. So those are the things that kind of like, I know how to use those already. I know what I can do with that. I don't know how to use Rust, but I know enough programming to maybe be able to get by. So thankfully, VS Code is owned by Microsoft, which they have Copilot. So I co-piloted my way to a Rust Tauri app, and you can doing LLM models for code is a superpower. But if you don't come into it knowing where it's going to drop the ball, you can really shoot yourself in the foot. Like if you just go to ChatGPT and say, write me a script that does this thing, you might get something useful. You might get something that absolutely works. And I think one thing that's important to remember is that if something just barely works, that's enough. Like most of the internet just barely works. And that's okay. Like if it works, it works. But the challenge comes in is if you want to sell it or you want to be able to give support for people, that's when you need to take this output and really understand it. And then you can also use LLMs to help you understand it. So we're at a golden age where if you want to learn how to code something to solve your own problem, really it just comes down to you being able to articulate what your problem is. And I think that's where, for me, that's where the AI stuff is helpful, because rather than me having to go to Stack Overflow and try to find what I want to do based on what other people have done. And there's all sorts of challenges, like the Adobe scripting environment is this old version of JavaScript. So you have to specify, like, I want ECMAScript 3 to be, and so there's just, the internet has moved on from that stuff. So finding the old methods of stuff it can be really challenging. So LLMs are really helpful for that. So you can be like, I would like to iterate over this array and output these values as an object with a name and a color. And it can do that. And then you try to run it and it doesn't work. And you're like, oh, this part is too new. So can you use this without using the every method? And then it'll be like, oh, okay. It knows, like, it's kind of magical. It's autocomplete. Like, that's, if you treat it like autocomplete rather than like, tell me what next word it should be, then it's really super powerful. So what I did was I knew enough of what I needed to do I had enough boilerplate in the Tori framework to build an app. And I did it. And it took me longer than I feel like it probably should, because I was going in blind. But I made it work. I was like, I have an app that I can run. And it was that same godlike feeling of like, I can make anything. And it was super inspiring. And then I knew, okay, I want the app to run in the menu bar. How do I do that? So take one step at a time and figure out, how do I get to the next thing that I want to do? Okay, how do I run a Socket.io server? Can I run a Node.js thing? No, that's off the table. Okay, that's can't start with that. So let's start with some other stuff. And then you just spend some time Googling and looking for ways around it. And I think as long as you're willing to put in the effort, which not everybody is, if you're not willing, if you want to just prompt something and get something immediately sellable, that this is not the business for you. If you're willing to clarify what your problem is that you're trying to solve, use some prompting to get you to learn what you don't already know, because that's really what it comes down to. Is like, sometimes, most of the time, you don't know what you don't know. And for me, like, I didn't know what JSON was the first time I was building a layer scraping system, and I made do. And then I learned about it, and then you learn. That's kind of the process of learning any of this stuff, is you learn how to learn and learn where you're running into problems. And so I think it's, I mean, I'm skeptical about the AI generating thing, but I'm also a crusty old man. And so I'm okay with that. It's not for me. Like, I don't derive a lot of curiosity about that, but I am really curious about using it to help me code, because honestly, I didn't get into code because I like typing symbols into a text file. That's the least interesting part of it for me. The thing that I enjoy most is clarifying an idea and looking for simplicity in that. That's where, whether it's design or whether it's the code that runs on the computer, like, finding the simplicity, that's what's actually interesting to me. So I spent so much time just going to Stack Overflow and looking at forums, trying to figure out how to put all of these archaic symbols together to make the simplicity. Now I can define what I want, and if it's small enough and it's compact enough, then I can create a little function, and then I can create that function, and I can stack that function with another function. And I'm actually becoming a better coder because of it. by really clarifying. I would have these huge long functions that only did one thing. And now, because I am learning to more effectively articulate what I'm trying to build, and then asking Copilot or GPT, like, help me build this thing, this on a small level. Like, you don't want to say, help me build a whole app. You want to ask it to help you build a small chunk of it. And then you can really process, like, oh, that's what that does. And it becomes a more manageable bite-sized chunk. And then you can learn it, and then you can add it to your library of things that you use, and then you can call it when you need it. And I've become a better coder because of using the LLM stuff. And I think if I was starting today, I would really try to scratch my own itch and look for ways to build, just learn the bare minimum of what you need to make the thing that you want to make, so that you can stay motivated instead of going and learning everything about computer science. Like, learn just the bare minimum of what you need to make the thing that you want that scratches your own itch, and then build on that and really understand it and clarify it and simplify it so that you can understand it. And then when you can understand it, then you can add to it, and then you can keep going with that. But I think it's a very interesting time for motion designers who want to automate some of their workflows. And I think that Jake does it all the time. He GPTs his way to a script that maybe you could sell on a marketplace, but probably is more effective to just keep it for yourself and maybe share it with your team, because you have your own workflow. And this is, one of the pitfalls of building tools for a larger audience is that you kind of have to you can't go as detailed as you want to. There's plenty of people who have asked, this happened the other day. Somebody asked, is there a way that we could make Overlord create art, but with the anchor point in the top left? Like, yes, but and I'm not saying that we won't ever do it. It's just at this point right now, I'm struggling to think of a simple way to add that option, which doesn't complicate the process of just clicking a button and getting art in there. Sometimes I think about, okay, well, maybe it would actually be easier and more effective for that to be a secondary process, whether it's something that we make or it's something that you buy from someone else or just create in GPT. It might be better for that to be a secondary process so that it's more deliberate. And even though it might be nicer to be able to just click one button and it does exactly what you want, sometimes having that secondary process, sometimes increasing the friction, actually makes something more useful because you're forced to be more deliberate about what your actions are. And so sometimes I have to say no. Sometimes I have to say, because these tools are for a large audience, sometimes doing less is actually more effective than getting really hyper-focused. And I've tried. There have been times where I've updated something because somebody asked for it, and it breaks a whole other set of workflows. And I've learned that, one, I can't be reactive to when people say something, even if it's something, whether it's a bug or it's something like, "Ooh, that's actually really interesting." I can't be reactive and just go off and build it right away. I have to take the time to think about it, and I have to take the time to evaluate, how does this fit, not just this one feature, how does this fit into the whole ecosystem of this tool? Like, what would be the ramifications for how people use this tool? And what if we change this? If we change this thing, that might make some people's lives better, but it might actually make some people's lives worse. So I'm learning to recognize that innovation isn't always progress. Sometimes it's actually hurting people and the things that they rely on. And so that's my long-winded answer of how, if I were starting today, I would actually go about using some of this technology.
So you have a pretty unique perspective on, I guess you'd call it, motion pipelines, the way that teams pull together motion projects at particularly large companies like Google, right? And when I first heard the story about like the way that Google were doing the 3 dots or the 4 dots or whatever it is, and like how meticulous and repetitive and unautomated that was, like it kind of blew me away. I was like, I can't believe even back then that Google were doing that in that way. Um, so I guess this is like a broad question, like how have you seen motion pipelines evolve? Like people like you, people like Zach Glover, and loads of other people in the industry are kind of like called in to improve this. Some agencies or have people in house who, as you've mentioned, like are the code guy or the code girl. Like, how have you seen it evolve those pipelines? It's kind of a not very well articulated question, but I'm just interested in your reflections on it, like and where you see it going and how you see it changing. Like, are there roles that people used to have that don't exist anymore just because code has solved it? Or, yeah,
Yeah, I think that I have a bit of a longer history with tech stuff, and a lot of my understanding about how motion fits into technology these days might be a little out of date. And I'm okay with that. I think that I started at Google in 2016, which was shortly after they launched their material initiative and like clear design, like, and it became Google went from being, of course, this is where we look for things on the internet, to wow, Google is really pretty. And I remember hearing a talk at the first Blend Fest about all of the thoughtfulness that they put into how many vector points are on their logo so that it reduces bandwidth in like lower income countries because people pay per megabyte. So how they could do little things like that. And I was blown away by that. So I didn't feel like I was qualified to go work at Google. And I never thought that in a million years that I would have been asked to do that. But because of my skill set of being a motion designer and also straddling the line between kind of coding and kind of thinking about workflows, it was in retrospect, almost 10 years later, like I can look back and go, oh, that makes sense why they hired me. So I went there, and the first round was about a year and a half or so. And it was really me doing more traditional graphic or motion design and focusing on how these transitions would make sense in the context of the product. And I worked on search. And so how we're going to introduce this card. So that was a little bit more traditional. And then I left and then came back in 2018 as a remote worker, which this is before remote work was cool, it was pre-COVID. And I was there for about 4 years. And my job at that point, because they realized that my strengths were thinking about the workflows and the pipelines of this stuff, so that motion designers, instead of having to animate individual keyframes for dots, they could just think about the dots as a whole thing and think about states and moving through things. And this was pre-Lottie. This was pre-Rive. This was pre-anything. Like everything was the Wild West. And we were making things up as we went along. And I think that I saw a bit of a transition between early on. Motion design was sort of just like, oh, we deal with the motion after, like right before we go to production, right before we hand it off to engineer. Like we'll have a motion designer kind of like fancy it up a little bit. And then the progression of that was motion design got a bigger seat at the table to define how the brand felt, how the product felt. And it was kind of an encouraging thing to see that happen. But that also brought with it a lot of challenges. Instead of it just being a design aesthetic thing, it needed to be thoughtful. It needed to be executable. It needed to be something that engineering could work with. Because when I first started at Google in 2016, they were still generating like Targa sequences for the states of the dots that were actually on your phone. So what you saw on the phone that looked like a nice fluid thing in the early dot days was just a Targa sequence, and they had a sort of a semi-elegant transition system, and it was awful. I was shocked by how low tech it was, but like most of the stuff on the internet, if it barely works, it still works. And it was good enough. So now we're seeing a lot more thoughtfulness put into motion and how it integrates with design systems and design tokens, and how motion can think on a more atomic level, and how you can have these transitions that, I mean, in the same way that, like, with graphic design, you might have a font weight that works at a certain size, and then you have a different font weight that works at a completely larger size. Like, you have to think about it adds a layer of complexity to that, but it still is part of thinking about it. You can't, one thing at this size doesn't equal the same thing at this size. Same thing with motion. Like, we would, being in search, we touched a lot of the surfaces. Like, there was TV and there was cars, and we had our team of motion designers were working all over the place, and here learning about all of their different considerations, like how little motion you're allowed to use on automotive, because you've got this screen over here that's distracting, that could potentially distract people and could potentially injure or kill people. The design considerations for that are so much different than like a TV, but a TV it's a much larger canvas. So you can't do these long sweeping motions unless it's like really deliberate. It has to be very intentional about how this movement is drawing your eye, and it could potentially distract, or it could be kind of a high motion, high strobing kind of thing that could affect people with epilepsy. And so there's just a lot of different considerations. And I think that motion design is uniquely positioned for that, because motion is always thinking about design, like graphic design and the visuals and the art of it. It's always thinking about movement and how people experience something through time. It's thinking about story. It's having to think about text and readability. It's having to think about sound and music. And I think motion designers, like, those are our considerations all the time. And I think that motion design is a unique art form or discipline, maybe, that the people who do this stuff are really well suited for tech. And at the same time, we do need people who are willing to step out of the roles of setting the keyframes and think about the pipelines of this stuff, because design, UX design, any of it is really about empathy. You're having to think about how the user is experiencing it. And a motion designer is the user sometimes. And I think that's where I and a handful of other weirdos in this business have learned to position ourselves as like, no, we think about the motion designer as the user. We're thinking about them as someone who is hitting a speed bump and they're getting derailed from the task that they're trying to do. And the task that they're trying to do is stay focused, and so that they can be empathetic towards the end user. And it's challenging, and I don't really know. I don't know how feasible it is for people to be the workflow mancer or the pipeline person. I don't know. I don't know how that works, and I don't know. I mean, I don't know if schools are teaching that level of thinking these days. It's sort of something that I think that as you do the work, you kind of maybe find that, oh, actually, I want to think about this stuff. And I don't know if it's actually a job description. Like, for me, it wasn't a job description. And it was kind of hard to like put me as a line item as a remote worker to say, Adam just is kind of here and he fixes stuff and he makes sure that we don't get too deep into things without doing it the right way. So I don't even know what that job position would be, and I don't even know how you would put that on your LinkedIn. But I think that as you do the work, as you are working as a motion designer or a UX designer or whatever it is, I think you inevitably find that, oh, I like thinking about how my peers are doing their work. I want to help them. I want to make sure that everybody stays on track. And I think you just sort of do it, and then you start doing it, and then you look around and realize, oh, I do a completely different job now. And I think that that's kind of where pipeline design for motion, I think that's kind of where it has to be in this. That's how I got here. And I think most of the people who do this stuff for thinking about pipelines, I think that's how they kind of got here too.
I think most industries and disciplines need their own like DevOps, but most people don't have that. Well, I mean, maybe they are, but maybe it's not just formalized, or maybe I just don't know enough industries. But I think, yeah, every kind of like pipeline where people are creating things or creating output needs someone who's not creating output, but like running along the pipeline and optimizing it.
Yeah, and I think like certainly... visual effects, they've got the technical director role. That's an actual role, and like coding actually has the DevOps role. But motion design is kind of a sub thing inside of tech anyway, so it's kind of like a sub of a sub, and I don't think it's been formalized yet. I don't know what that term would be, but that would be an interesting term to coin. I would like that. I usually just make up my own.
I certainly feel like that oscillation or tension, or just I'm interested in two things in our company. This is a 3-person video team with like a lead, which is head of content, who doesn't produce video but leads the team. And we very much feel like 3 separate video producers. And at the moment, I'm like trying to sort of rectify that so that we collaborate more. And I'm thinking a lot about the systems and the way that we work, whether it's just like the way that we archive projects or like run new files or do new scripts or like access B-roll efficiently, all of those things. But it's so easy to just be like, I don't have time to think about that right now. I just need to create. And you sort of have to step out of it. And the other reflection that I had was just a theme, I think, of what we have been speaking about a lot and what comes up a lot on this podcast is the art and science of what you do. Like my mum's always mentioned that, like it's always been a big thing in her work. Like there is always this art and science of what you do. You can kind of look at what you do as both art and science. And I find that really useful. Anyway, no more deeper reflections.
I think if you're able to clarify exactly what it is that you do, it's not science anymore. It's just a trade or it's a craft. But like when you can say, I don't exactly like when you the most interesting science is like the fringes of cutting edge stuff where we don't know if this is going to break, but we're trying it and it's going to be really interesting. That's engineering. Like your engineering is just hacking your way towards a solution that you hope will maybe yield something interesting. And then once it sort of does, then we'll formalize it and then we'll work on it through there. But I think that not knowing is okay. I think that that's a good place to be. I think as long as you take the time to like really make sense of it, I think that's a good place to be.
So we got to wrap up fairly soon. I had a couple of other questions. What are your favorite plugins? And maybe you can also answer who are your favorite tool creators in the ecosystem. That aren't yours, obviously. Not that you would say that.
There are. I mean, there's a lot of amazing tools, and because I don't do a lot of production anymore, I find that I don't always get to use them as much. But the ones that I always go back to and the ones that I always install, like I really love this one called Labels, that it's just a colored bar that lives and you can just hit that the bar.
Tom.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah. And it is, I've bought every version that has come out, just because it's so simple. And you just hit the button when you just want to change the colors of the label colors in After Effects. I really love Zach Lovett's Flow. I think that's just that one is just indispensable. You just clearly, it just makes sense. Of course, and I've recommended that one to so many people.
It's so distilled. Like you could make a graphing like preset easing tool so much more complex than that. And there are others that are out there that do that and that are really, really useful. But it's sort of like the 80-20 principle maybe, or something. It's like, it's simple enough and complex enough for it to be like very easy to just get up and running with and just use all the time. It might miss a few things that you might want to do if you're like super nerdy about it, but then you just have a graph editor. So yeah, it's very elegant kind of like solution that hasn't evolved tons over the years, actually, but it doesn't need to. Like, yeah,
it's kind of achieved its perfect form very, very quickly. One that I use that is not for everybody, but I find it really useful is Expressionist. It's kind of like a code editor that'll give you syntax highlighting for expressions, and you can run really small scripts inside of After Effects.
That's Remco, I think.
It is, yeah. And it's a niche thing. Like, you have to be doing more than a wiggle command for it to be useful. But once you start getting into it, it's so helpful. K-bar is indispensable. I mean, yes, you can like apply presets and stuff, but I use it for development because in the early stages of it, I will write a JSX file, and instead of having to import it and like reload it, I will set a button to run it. So as I'm working on just either it could be a UI, like a script UI thing, or just a function that I just need to test, and like I'm iterating and I save it, instead of having to save it, import, close After Effects, whatever you need to do, I just set it to a K-bar button, and just so that I'm like working on it, make a change, press the button. Did it work? No. Make a change, click the button. Oh, there it is. That's what I was trying to do. And then you can work from there. So it's really low tech, but that one I use a lot. And then I'll mention Good Boy Ninja. Skew is the tool that I wish I would have developed. At one point, I was trying to come up with a timeline system, and it didn't pan out. But
how complex, in a nutshell, how complex does that product have to be? Like, it just seems like, yeah, I don't know anything about it, but it just seems like so huge to
without going on a crazy rant on that. Like, you can build a UI for something, but having it synchronize with the After Effects system is a nightmare. And he managed to crack that in a much more elegant way, like with you have brushes where you can nudge stuff, and like you can select like alternating ones. It's really like, I mean, and his marketing is just great. Like, it's way younger than anything that I would have done, and if I tried, it would have felt flat.
Dude, yours is awesome. Like, we haven't been able to touch on this, but that is one of the most outstanding, like, remarkable features of Battleaxe is the brand. So it's
thank you.
Just say it's different. Be kind to yourself.
Thank you. I try to. I mean, a lot of that stuff is just what kind of comes out naturally in my weird way of working things. But if it's Good Boy Ninja is like, that's the one. Like, if I could go back, that and K-bar, like if I could have built those, that would have been amazing. But thank you. I like the branding thing. It's fun.
Yeah, we didn't get into that, and we don't have time. Maybe next time, hopefully. But I would love to one day learn more about like your branding process and the way that you like make those films and they do the music. Like, we haven't talked about music, so I'll have to do this again.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I'm big on Cavalry at the moment. Like, it's a new tool. It's lots of people are getting interested in it. I'm wondering what your experience with it has been, and your interest or opinion on it, and maybe just more generally, like any other new tools that you're spotting in the industry.
Like a lot of folks, I'm really stoked on Rive. I think that Rive gives me that feeling that I had early After Effects days, where it's a completely new thing that, oh my gosh, I could do so much stuff with this. Cavalry is kind of a similar thing, and I really am looking forward to doing something with Cavalry. Right now, I haven't had a chance to dig into it as much, but I'm really fascinated by so much of the things that it does well that I don't think people notice as much. They look at it and go, oh, this is kind of like an After Effects thing. But the parts that are really fascinating to me are the fact that you can just render, like, I mean, I come from a history of having to do versions. The fact that you can just render out hundreds, thousands of versions, and they can be named and organized well, like, that is incredible. And I think that that's the easiest thing to miss. Like, that's super powerful, but it's the thing that is not getting talked about as much. It's not that it's a half-ass version of After Effects, it's that it's a completely different thing. And when that can become a part of, instead of focusing on like what it can't do, like, oh, it doesn't do visual effects or 3D or whatever new After Effects thing. Like, we don't need to replace After Effects. We need to use After Effects for what After Effects is good at, and focus on the areas that Cavalry is like really, really light years beyond what a lot of these more legacy rendering systems can do or will do or are interested in doing. I think Cavalry is going to be really interesting to watch.
What's a problem that Battleaxe hasn't solved yet? And maybe another way of asking this is, if you had 5 years straight to work on something and 10x the resources that you had, like, what would you work on?
This isn't a very interesting answer, or maybe it is. I don't know. I think I was scared to revisit Overlord because for various reasons, but one, from I don't know how I'm going to pull this off, but two, from is my place in this industry to make a layer transfer system? How do I approach that? And I think my long-term vision for Overlord is probably going to take like 5 years. My vision for it is, I don't think anything's ever going to replace After Effects. And I don't think anything really needs to replace After Effects. I think that motion designers are going to continually have to, we use Blender for this, and we use Cinema 4D for this, and we use Rive for this, and we're going to use Cavalry to deliver this other thing over here. I think that instead of motion designers having to pick something, it's going to be yes and. We're all going to have to move between all of these different tools. Like right now it's Figma for UI stuff, and some people love Affinity, and for various technical reasons they may or may not be able to connect with each other. But my long-term vision is that I want motion designers and animators to be able to just work, to just whatever makes sense for the pipeline, for the project, to be able to work between stuff. Like there's enough overlap between these things. Like if you know Illustrator, you can probably get up to speed in Figma really quickly. If you know Cinema 4D, you might have to deal with some weird stuff, but you can get into Blender pretty quickly. And sometimes whether you're a freelancer or whether just the job requires it, whether the app has a special thing, whether you need to render out 1,000 things, we're going to need to move between stuff. And so my long-term vision is that Overlord can kind of bridge between all of the things, and people can just keep working. I don't think I would do anything different if I had 10x the resources, because I kind of like moving a little bit slower. I kind of like, instead of just hopping on whatever the next hot thing is, I like giving it an opportunity to observe and see where things are moving and what is the most effective use of time. So I probably wouldn't change a thing. I would keep working on Overlord for the next half a decade or a decade.
It's good to hear. Sounds like a great vision. Adam, thank you so much for your time, man. This has been great. Been a pleasure to meet you finally after all these years of using your tools and hearing about you from friends and stuff. So yeah, appreciate this, and best of luck on what's next, and I look forward to having you on again sometime.
Thanks so much, Jack. I appreciate it.